The day my stepmother sold my childhood home, she stood in the front yard wearing my mother's pearl earrings and smiling like she had finally won. The new buyer's truck was parked half on the grass, half on the cracked driveway my father had patched with his own hands every summer for 20 years. A sold sign leaned crookedly beside the porch, and the front door was open wide enough for strangers to walk through the rooms where I learned to ride a bike, got my first fever, and cried into my pillow the night my mother died. I had only come back to Maple Hollow because my neighbor texted me a photo of the sign. At first I thought it had to be a joke. Then I saw Denise, my stepmother, in the yard with a clipboard tucked under her arm, laughing with a couple from Columbus who were already talking about tearing out the old oak tree in front of the house. That tree had been there longer than I had. I parked across the street and got out slowly, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. Denise saw me first. Her smile didn't disappear. Exactly. It sharpened. "Well," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "look who finally decided to come home." I ignored her and stared at the couple, who were now looking at me like I was some stray dog from the wrong side of the fence. "Please tell me this is a mistake," I said. The man looked at Denise, then back at me. "We already signed. Closing's done. We were told the house was clear." Denise lifted her chin. "It is clear. This is my property." Before I could answer, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me not to. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through, clipped and professional. "Miss Carter? This is Ellen from the county recorder's office. I'm calling because a title transfer was just submitted on the property at 1148 Cedar Lane, and there appears to be a serious issue with ownership." I looked at Denise. The smile on her face faltered for the first time. The woman on the phone continued. "According to county records, the land beneath the house is not part of the estate being sold. It was deeded years ago to another owner. You, Miss Carter, are listed as that owner." I felt the blood drain from my face. Denise blinked once, then twice, like she hadn't heard a word. "That's impossible." But I knew from the tone of Ellen's voice that nothing about it was impossible. Nothing except the way my stepmother's entire world was about to collapse. I had not spoken to Denise in almost 2 years, not since my father's funeral, not since she cried in front of the pastor and let everyone believe she was the grieving widow while she quietly asked me if I planned to make things difficult over the house. I had let the question slide then because I was too heartbroken to fight. Now I understood she had mistaken my silence for surrender. She took a step toward me. "What did you do?" I almost laughed. It came out bitter and broken. "What did I do? Denise, what did you do?" The couple from Columbus were staring at both of us now. Their real estate agent was backing toward the curb, already sensing disaster. Denise lowered her voice and hissed, "Not here." I looked past her at the house, at the porch swing my father had built from cedar boards, at the kitchen window where my mother used to stand and wave me in for dinner, at the flower bed I had planted with my own hands when I was 12. A house can hold 1,000 memories, but the ground beneath it holds something deeper. It holds proof. It holds history. It holds the truth, long after people decide to lie. And as I stood there in the yard where I had once buried my dog, where I had once made snow angels, where I had once promised my mother I would never forget home, I realized Denise had sold a house she never fully understood. She had sold my childhood, and she had done it without knowing that the land it stood on belonged to me. 3 days earlier, I had been in Chicago, sitting in the office of a title insurance company on the 23rd floor, staring at a stack of files while rain streaked the windows behind me. My life had been tidy then, controlled, the kind of life built out of careful decisions and locked doors. I worked in land records because I liked facts that could be traced, dates that could be verified, ownership that could not be argued away by someone loud enough to dominate a room. My friends used to joke that I was allergic to chaos. That morning, chaos had found me anyway. My phone lit up with a text from my old neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who still lived 2 houses down from Cedar Lane. You need to come home. Denise put the house on the market. I stared at the message for a long minute, feeling that strange, hollow sensation that comes before anger has fully arrived. My first thought was not about money. It was not even about the house itself. It was about the hydrangeas by the porch my mother had planted before she got sick. It was about the kitchen cabinet where my father kept the good coffee mugs. It was about the scratches on the wooden banister where I had slid my hands down every morning while running late for school. I called Mrs. Alvarez immediately. What do you mean she put it on the market? Well, she said, lowering her voice like the house itself might hear her. She had a realtor over. 2 showings already. I saw a for sale sign go up yesterday. She told everybody the place was hers now. That doesn't make any sense. That's what I said, honey. But you know Denise. I did know Denise. I knew the kind of woman who smiled too widely when other people were watching and said cruel things softly enough to pretend they were jokes. I knew the woman who married my father 8 years after my mother died and immediately started rearranging everything as if grief had been sloppy housekeeping. My father, Daniel Carter, had been a gentleman, a stubborn man, a man who fixed broken things instead of throwing them out. He married Denise because he was lonely and because she knew how to talk in the exact tone that convinced him she admired him. But Denise never loved my father the way my mother had. She loved what his life could do for hers. She loved the house, too. Not because it was beautiful. It wasn't. It was a plain white ranch with blue shutters and a sagging back deck. But it sat on 5 acres outside Maple Hollow, surrounded by mature trees, a creek, and a long strip of land that had once been part of my grandfather's farm. Land was cheap there when my father was young. It had become expensive later, when the town began creeping outward, and developers started circling like vultures. My father had always said the land was the only thing in the family that had never lied to him. When my mother got sick, Denise had started bringing up the idea of downsizing. After my father died, she stopped pretending. I called a cab to the train station, took the first ride back to Ohio, and spent 2 hours staring out the window while the suburbs gave way to fields, then to trees, then to the town I had spent years trying not to miss. By the time I reached Cedar Lane, the house already looked different, not because anything had changed on the outside, but because someone had put a brand new sign in the yard and made my mother's home look like inventory. Denise was standing on the porch when I arrived, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, dressed in a cream-colored blazer, as if she were attending a business brunch instead of trying to strip a dead man's daughter of her childhood. You could have called, she said. You could have asked before you tried to sell my home. She gave me a flat look. Your home? Elena, you left years ago. Don't call me Elena when you're angry. You only do that when you want to sound like you know me. A flicker moved across her face, but it was gone so fast I could have imagined it. The house is mine now, she said. Your father left it to me. Then show me the will. She took a slow sip of coffee. Maybe I should show you the bills first, or the taxes, or the repairs. I've been carrying this place for 2 years while you played city girl and acted like grief was some kind of part-time hobby. The words hit like a slap, because they were designed to. Denise had always known where the weak spots lived. She had always reached for them, with clean nails and a calm expression. My father had been dead for 23 months. In that time, Denise had drained the savings account, sold the old truck, and moved her son Travis into the detached garage with his gaming setup and his girlfriend's dog. She had claimed that, after all the sacrifice she made by staying with my father through the cancer, she deserved something for herself. I had not argued because I was tired and because my father's death had left me raw in a way I still didn't have language for. I had taken a few boxes of my mother's things, one photograph of my parents on the porch, and a jar of pebbles from the creek, then left the rest because I thought time would sort things out. Time, I was learning, only sorts out what people stop fighting for. I want the deed, I said. Denise's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? The deed. The will. Whatever document says you own this property. She gave a short, cold laugh. You think you can bully me with legal words because you work in an office with fancy glass walls? No, I said, stepping closer. I think you're lying. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the porch rail. I could smell the vanilla candle she always burned in the front room, a scent that had never fit the house and never would. Then she set down her coffee hard enough that it sloshed over the rim. You don't get to come back here after abandoning this family and start demanding things, she said. Your father trusted me. This was my home, too. No, I said quietly. It was his, and before that, it was my mother's. You were a guest. Her face tightened. A guest who kept your father alive long enough for you to show up at the funeral and cry for attention. That was the first time I saw the real Denise, the one under all the polish, not grieving, not patient, just furious that I existed. I left before I said something I couldn't take back, but I didn't leave town. I checked into a motel off the highway and spent that night on my laptop pulling every record I could find. The first thing I learned was that Denise had not inherited the land. The second thing I learned was worse. The land beneath the house had been deeded to me 14 years earlier. I sat up so fast the motel bed creaked. I refreshed the county site, then again. Same result. My name, not Denise's, not my father's, mine. I stared at the screen until the logic finally settled in. My grandfather, Earl Carter, had done it. He had been a quiet man with weathered hands and a farmer's mind, the kind of person who understood that land could save a family or destroy one depending on who held the title. When I was 16, he had taken me out to the back 40 after dinner and talked to me like I was older than I was. You listen to me, Ellie, he had said. People get ugly over property. The minute money gets involved, everybody starts forgetting what they promised. So, I'm going to do something your father won't talk about. I'm making sure you're protected. At the time, I had rolled my eyes in the way teenagers do when adults start sounding like weather reports. I thought he meant a savings bond, maybe a college fund. He never said another word about it before he died 6 months later. My father had probably known. In fact, now that I thought about it, he had always seemed to know more than he said. He had kept the old documents in a fireproof box in the hallway closet, and whenever Denise suggested updating the paperwork, he changed the subject. I drove home the next morning and went straight to the house, but Denise had already put a new lock on the hall closet. You don't live here, she said when I asked for the key. I need the papers. No. You need to understand that this is my life now, and I don't have to explain every decision to a daughter who chose to disappear. There it was again. Not Ellie, not Elena. Daughter, in the same tone people use for inconvenient furniture. I stared at the hall closet, at the little brass doorknob my father had polished every Christmas. Where's the safe? In my room. Then open it. I'm busy. You have time to show the house to strangers, but not to show me my father's will? Denise crossed her arms. You think I'm scared of you? You think because you work in law, you can talk down to me in my own house? Your house? I said. If it's your house, prove it. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. The silence between us stretched thin. Then Travis came loping in from the kitchen with his baseball cap backward and a sandwich in his hand. He was 26 and still carried himself like a boy who had never been told no without immediately finding a way around it. Hey, he said, glancing between us. Why is it always drama when you come around? Because your mother tried to sell the house without checking who owns the land under it. He snorted. That sounds fake. It would have been nice, I said, if the truth were more convenient for all of us. Denise looked at him sharply. Go upstairs. He hesitated. For the first time, he looked less like a spoiled kid and more like a man who suspected he was standing in the middle of something dangerous. He went upstairs anyway. Denise turned back to me, lowering her voice. You're trying to scare me. No. I'm trying to understand how you sold property you didn't own. I didn't sell it. I listed it. Then you lied to the agent. I told him what I believed. That's not going to save you. A muscle twitched in her jaw. You have no idea what I've had to do to keep this roof over our heads. By our heads, do you mean yours and Travis's? Because I noticed my things ended up in the attic, and my mother's photo album ended up in a storage box marked old junk. Her eyes flashed. Your father's medical bills were enormous. My heart gave one hard thud. What did you just say? She looked satisfied that she'd finally landed a blow. He didn't leave you the burden of that, did he? He left it to me. I paid for the treatments. I paid for the hospice nurse. I paid for the prescriptions when Medicare didn't cover them. You think that came from nowhere? I knew my father's last year had been expensive. I also knew my father had planned for it. He was too practical not to have. But Denise had a way of speaking that made people second-guess themselves, so I did the only thing I could do. I smiled. All right, I said. Then show me the statements. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. That told me everything. The first real crack appeared 2 days later, when I found the blue fireproof box hidden behind winter coats in the upstairs hallway closet. It had not been locked. Denise had probably assumed I wouldn't know where to look. Inside were tax receipts, old insurance papers, and a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. For several seconds, I just stood there holding it, too afraid to open it in case it turned out to be ordinary. But ordinary things don't make your hands shake the way this did. Inside was a letter, folded once. Ellie, if you are reading this, then Denise has done what I was afraid she would do. I'm sorry I didn't say enough while I was alive. I should have. The land is yours. I put it in your name because your grandfather asked me to, and because I needed to know there would be something left for you that couldn't be taken by charm or pressure. Denise knows about the house, but she never asked about the land. She thinks silence is weakness. It isn't. It is often strategy. Use the records. Trust what can be proven. And don't let anyone tell you home belongs only to the people who stay. Sometimes the person who leaves is the only one who comes back in time. I had to sit down on the floor after that, not because I was surprised he had protected me, but because he had seen all of this coming and never been able to stop it without starting a war. My father had loved me in the only way he knew how. Quietly, legally, permanently. There was another page in the envelope. A copy of the deed, stamped and recorded, listing me as the owner of the parcel that included the house, the yard, the well, the septic, and the narrow strip of woods where I used to build forts with my cousins. Every inch of it was mine. My phone buzzed while I sat there. A text from Denise. The buyer wants to close tomorrow. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at the message and laughed once, sharply, because of course she had the nerve to send that now. I called the buyer's agent first. Then I called the title company. Then I called the county recorder's office and asked them to email me certified copies of the land records immediately. By the time I finished, I had enough documentation to bury Denise under a mountain of facts. Still, facts alone do not stop people like her. Facts merely corner them. I spent that night assembling a binder like I was building a case, because, in a way, I was. Deeds, records, tax histories, utility bills, photographs, the letter from my father, and the final piece that changed everything. A recorded affidavit from my grandfather's estate attorney stating that the land was intentionally transferred to me to prevent future sale without my consent. There was also a clause in the deed that Denise had never bothered to read. Right of occupation expired upon Daniel Carter's death. When I saw those words, the air seemed to leave the room. My father had allowed her to remain there only while he was alive. Afterward, the house and land belonged to me. I went back the next morning before sunrise. The buyer was scheduled to meet Denise at 9, and I wanted to be there before anyone signed anything else. The house looked smaller in early light, almost fragile. The porch boards creaked under my shoes exactly the way they always had, as if the place recognized me, even if the people inside it had not. Denise was in the kitchen, speaking sharply into her phone. "No, the title issue is being handled," she said. "It's a formality." I stood in the doorway until she noticed me. When she did, she covered the receiver with her palm and snapped. "I told you not to come here until we were done." "Done with what? Fraud?" Her face hardened. She gestured to the phone. "Hang on." Then, to the person on the other end, "I'll call you back." She ended the call and turned to me. Whatever little game you think you're playing, stop. I'm not playing. She saw the binder in my hand and went still. I set it on the table and opened it to the deed. This land was transferred to me 14 years ago. Your right of occupation ended when my father died. You knew that if you had ever bothered to check. She laughed in disbelief, but it sounded strained now. You expect me to believe your grandfather left you 5 acres in the house? Not the house, I said. The land. The house is sitting on it. She actually stepped back then, and that tiny motion said more than any speech could have. That isn't possible. It's recorded. She grabbed the papers and flipped through them too quickly to understand them. Then she reached the deed and froze. The color drained from her face. No, she whispered. Yes. Her eyes darted around the kitchen like she was searching for another version of reality. Daniel never told me. That's because he didn't trust you. Her head snapped up. Don't you dare. Why not? It's true. She slammed the papers down. You think this changes everything? You think because you own some dirt you get to erase everything I did for this family? For this family? I repeated. You listed my childhood home behind my back and tried to hand it to strangers because you wanted a payout. You moved your boyfriend into my father's garage. You threw away my mother's things. You told people I abandoned this house when you were the one picking through its bones. You don't understand what it cost me to keep things together after Daniel died. No, I said, my voice trembling now. I understand exactly what it cost. It cost you the ability to take what wasn't yours. That was when Travis came in, looking half asleep and irritated, until he saw the binder on the table and his mother's face. What's going on? He asked. Denise answered too quickly. Your sister's trying to sabotage the sale. I looked at him. Did your mother tell you she sold the house? He frowned. She said she was downsizing. And did she tell you she didn't own the land? He blinked. That sounds complicated. It's not complicated, I said. It's recorded ownership. Travis looked between us, and I said, You told me we were getting out from under the taxes, he said slowly. Denise's jaw tightened. We are. No, I said. You were getting out from under the consequences. She shot me a glare so poisonous it might have cracked glass. You have ruined everything. I stared at her, and for the first time I didn't feel small in her presence. I felt sad. Not for her. For my father, who had spent his last year being lied to by a woman he had once trusted. For my mother, whose house had become a battlefield after she was gone. For the version of myself that used to believe keeping the peace was the same thing as being good. No, I said. You did that yourself. The buyer arrived 15 minutes later with his agent and the title officer, a neat woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a stack of documents under her arm. Denise attempted to intercept them at the front door with the kind of practiced smile that had probably worked on men who thought loud confidence meant legitimacy. But the title officer had already received my emails. We can't close, she said after a quick review of the records. Not without the landowner's consent. Denise laughed in a brittle burst. I am the landowner. The title officer looked at me. Miss Carter, are you the recorded owner of parcel 17B, Cedar Lane? Yes. The room changed. It was subtle, but I felt it. The temperature of everyone's attention shifted toward Denise. The buyer's agent began checking his phone. The buyer himself, a middle-aged man in a golf shirt who had clearly expected a simple transaction, looked like he wanted to crawl out a window. This is absurd, Denise snapped. My husband left this property to me. The officer remained calm. Do you have a probate order or recorded deed establishing that claim? Denise went rigid. No, but no probate order? The officer asked. No recorded deed? The buyer's agent added, sharper now. Denise's mouth opened, then closed. That was when I saw the true shape of her panic. It was not just fear of losing the sale. It was fear of being exposed in front of witnesses. The title officer slid my binder across the table and said, Miss Carter has provided certified records indicating the land ownership reverted to her upon Daniel Carter's death. The transfer you attempted is not valid. We're stopping the closing. The buyer swore under his breath. You told me this was clean. Denise threw up her hands. It is clean. She's making trouble because she's angry. I shook my head slowly. No, I'm making records. For the first time, the buyer looked at Denise with open suspicion. You said you inherited the whole property. I did. Then why does the deed say otherwise? The title officer asked. Silence. The kind of silence that exposes a liar more thoroughly than shouting ever could. Then Travis said very quietly, Mom, she turned on him. Not now. You told me the money from the sale was going to pay off the house and get me out of debt. It was, but you didn't say you didn't own it. He had it handled. No, you didn't, he said, and there was something in his voice I had never heard before. Disappointment, yes, but also the beginning of distance. That seemed to hit her harder than anything I had said. The sale collapsed within 10 minutes. The buyer threatened legal action. The title officer, who had apparently dealt with enough family disasters to remain mercilessly polite, left copies of every document on the kitchen table, and told Denise, in a level voice, that the matter would likely be referred for investigation if she had attempted to transfer property without lawful authority. After they left, Denise stood alone in the kitchen, breathing fast, her face drained of all color. Then she turned to me with a look so naked and furious, I almost stepped back. You planned this. I let out a laugh that was part disbelief, part pain. Planned what? For you to get caught lying? You went looking for a fight. No, I said. I went looking for my father's papers. She pointed at the binder. You think, because you found some old documents, that means you get to stand here and judge me? I think because my father trusted me enough to leave proof. I get to stand here and stop you from stealing from his daughter. Stealing? She spat. You left this house. You left all of us. You didn't care what happened here until there was money involved. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of it. This was never about money to me. It was about home. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Home? You weren't here when Daniel was dying. You weren't here when the furnace broke. You weren't here when I sat at this table alone after everyone else disappeared. My anger faltered, because for a second, I saw the grief underneath her rage, and I realized something ugly and human. Denise had not just wanted the house. She had wanted proof that the years she spent here mattered. She had wanted the house to validate the sacrifices she kept insisting she made. But wanting something does not make it yours. You could have talked to me, I said more softly. You could have asked for help. You could have told me you were struggling. Her eyes flashed wet, but she refused to let the tears fall. I asked your father for help. I asked for years, and every time he looked at me like I was temporary. That landed in my chest with a dull ache. My father had loved her, but perhaps he had never fully trusted her. Maybe he had tried to make peace by avoiding conflict, just as I had. Maybe silence had been the family disease all along. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then, I remembered the sale, the lies, the way she had worn my mother's earrings like a trophy. No one forced you to sell something that wasn't yours, I said. Denise's face hardened again. What do you want from me? The question caught me off guard, because I had expected screaming, denial, maybe even tears. Instead, she sounded tired, cornered, stripped down to a woman facing the wreckage she'd built herself. What did I want? I wanted my mother's china from the attic. I wanted the portrait of my parents by the fireplace. I wanted the summer afternoons back when my father grilled burgers and my mother sang in the kitchen. I wanted to stop feeling like every memory I had ever loved was being auctioned off by someone who considered grief a nuisance. But I also wanted something harder and stranger than revenge. I want you to leave, I said. Denise let out a bitter laugh. That's it? No. I want you to account for every dollar you took from my father's estate. I want the storage unit receipts. I want the bank records. I want the truth about the medical bills. And I want the house vacated by Friday. You can't throw me out. I'm not throwing you out. I'm enforcing the deed. Her lips parted, then pressed together so tightly they went pale. That's not enough for you, she said. You want to humiliate me. No, I replied. I want the same thing you wanted when you sold this place without telling me. Control. That one landed. I saw it in the way her shoulders dipped. Travis had been standing near the hallway, silent through all of it, but now he spoke. "Mom," he said, "did you really sell it without checking?" She stared at him. "Why are you taking her side?" "I'm not taking anyone's side," he said, though his voice sounded shaky. "I just want to know if you lied to me too." The room went still. Denise looked at her son, and, for one brief second, something close to shame crossed her face. Not enough to change the past, but enough to tell me she understood he was slipping away from her. "I did what I had to do," she said at last. Travis shook his head. "That's not an answer." She opened her mouth, then shut it again, and there it was, the real beginning of her punishment. Because people like Denise do not fear courtroom documents first. They fear being seen clearly by the people they think still owe them loyalty. The legal consequences moved faster than I expected. Once the title company reported the invalid sale attempt, the buyer filed a complaint. The county recorder flagged the transaction. My father's estate attorney, who had retired 2 years earlier but still kept immaculate files, confirmed the deed history within a day. Then the bank got involved because Denise had taken out a line of credit against the house based on false assumptions about ownership. Within a week, the fraud investigation widened. I did not relish any of it. That surprised me. I had spent years imagining revenge as something sharp and clean, but real justice is slower and messier. It involves forms, calls, meetings, and long silences while people with clipboards decide which truth matters in which order. Denise lost the sale, then the mortgage extension, then her legal leverage. The bank froze the account tied to the attempted transfer. The buyer demanded his deposit back. The county ordered a hearing. And when the attorney from the estate finally produced the recorded documents, the argument was over before it began. Denise had no legal right to sell the house. Worse, she had signed paperwork affirming ownership she did not possess. She hired a lawyer, then another. Then she started trying to reframe everything as a misunderstanding, which is what people call fraud when they're still hoping to keep the furniture. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. By then, the house had become the center of a storm. Denise stayed in the guest room and barely spoke to me except to demand access to the hallway closet. I let her have it under supervision because I was no longer interested in theatrics. I wanted the records, the photographs, the deeds, the things that would survive her excuses. One evening, while I was packing up the last of my mother's things, Travis knocked on my bedroom door. He looked embarrassed to be there, as if he had crossed some invisible line by choosing to speak to me without his mother present. "You got a minute?" he asked. I nodded. He stepped inside, glancing around at the boxes. "You really mean to keep the house?" "Yes." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She told me we'd probably have to move if the sale didn't go through." "I'm sorry." He gave a humorless little laugh. "Yeah, well, me too." There was a pause. Then he said, "She didn't tell me the whole story. About Dad, about the deed, about anything, really." I studied his face. Travis had always been selfish in the way people sometimes are when they grow up inside someone else's expectations. But now, he looked younger than I remembered, and more lost. "Your mother wanted the money," I said carefully. "That doesn't mean she wanted to hurt you." He nodded once. "Maybe not, but she definitely didn't mind hurting you." I couldn't argue with that. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the floor. "Did Dad really leave it to you on purpose?" "Yes." "Why?" I thought about that. "Because he knew Denise would sell it." He gave a short laugh. "That tracks." Then he glanced up, and what he said next surprised me. "I found something in the garage." He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were copies of old bank transfers, all made from my father's account to Denise's name, some labeled for medical bills, some not. There were also receipts for a storage unit she had rented 6 months after my father died. The dates mattered. The amounts mattered. One receipt showed a payment for a legal consultation regarding property disposition. I looked up. "Why are you giving me this?" He shrugged, but his eyes were wet. "Because she told me to lie if anyone asked, and because I'm pretty sure she used my credit card once to pay for the realtor deposit. I let out a slow breath. Did she know you had this? No. Then why keep it? He looked at me in a way that was so much like my father, it hurt. Because I'm not trying to end up like her. That was the closest thing to redemption anyone in this story was going to get. At the hearing, Denise showed up in a black suit and pearl earrings. My mother's pearls, I was sure of it. She looked exhausted, but still composed enough to make a stranger think she was the injured party. Her attorney argued hardship, misunderstanding, good faith. My attorney, a woman named Marisol, who could have dismantled a hurricane with her tone alone, laid out the deed trail in chronological order. There was no drama in her voice, none needed. The judge was an older man with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrical denial. When Denise claimed she had reason to believe she owned the land, the judge asked her to explain why she had never checked the county records. She answered too quickly. My husband handled all that. But you signed the transfer forms, he said. Yes, because the realtor said. So you relied on a realtor's word over recorded public documents? Denise's lawyer tried to pivot. The judge did not let him. When Marisol presented the letter from my father, the courtroom went silent. I did not expect to cry, but I did. Quietly, humiliatingly, because seeing his handwriting again made him feel briefly alive in the middle of all that legal coldness. The note was not dramatic. It did not accuse. It simply said he had done what he could. That was somehow worse. The judge ruled that Denise had no legal authority over the property, that the attempted sale was invalid, and that any financial gains derived from it would be subject to restitution and possible civil penalties. The bank immediately froze her remaining accounts pending review. The buyer, who had already hired his own attorney, withdrew from the transaction and began pursuing compensation for costs and damages. The county referred the matter to investigators after it was revealed Denise had submitted paperwork containing inaccurate ownership claims. She did not go to jail that day. Real life is slower than revenge fantasies. But she lost everything she had tried to take from the house, then more. By the time we left the courthouse, the sky had opened into a hard gray rain. Denise walked out ahead of me, shoulders stiff, hair damp, looking like a woman who had spent years building a wall, only to discover she had trapped herself behind it. She turned before getting into her car and said, "You never cared about me." The accusation was old, but now it sounded tired instead of sharp. I stood under the courthouse awning and looked at her. I cared enough to give you the chance to tell the truth. Her mouth trembled once. And now? Now you live with what you chose. She searched my face for softness and found none. Then, in the first honest moment I had ever seen from her, she said very quietly, "I really thought I could fix everything if I just had enough money." I almost answered, almost told her, money does not fix grief, or fear, or loneliness, or the emptiness that makes people think theft is survival. Almost told her that my father had left her a family, not a fortune. Instead, I said, "You could have fixed things by not lying." Her eyes filled, but she turned away before the tears could fall. That should have felt satisfying. It didn't. Not entirely, because revenge, I found, has a hollow center. It gives you back your footing, but not your peace. The peace came later. I moved back into the house 2 months after the hearing, not because I needed the space, but because I wanted to restore what had been taken from the place. I painted the kitchen the same warm cream my mother had loved. I rebuilt the porch swing. I cleaned the attic and found my childhood art projects, old Christmas ornaments, and the missing photo albums Denise had shoved into storage boxes. I found the quilt my grandmother made, folded neatly inside an old cedar trunk as if waiting for me. Travis came by once, then twice, then started helping on weekends. Not because he had suddenly become noble, but because he was trying, in his own awkward way, to become better than the worst thing his mother had taught him. He took down the garage apartment he'd started to claim as his own and found work at a mechanic shop in town. As for Denise, she moved into a rental across the highway after the bank froze the line of credit and the attorney fees began eating her alive. I heard through the grapevine that she sold her jewelry, then her car, then started working part-time at a salon. Her friends stopped calling as the story spread. Not because anyone in town was particularly righteous, but because people hate fraud when it becomes expensive to stand near it. That was her karma. Not a dramatic collapse, not some cinematic punishment, but the slow and realistic unraveling that comes when lies no longer have a roof to hide under. I didn't celebrate it. I did, however, sleep better. One evening, near the end of fall, I stood in the backyard as the sun dropped low over the trees and turned the creek into a strip of molten gold. The land looked almost exactly as it had when I was 10, and yet everything was different, because now I understood what had always been here. Not just a house, a legacy, a boundary, a promise. My father's letter had been framed and hung in the hallway. Not because it was perfect, but because it was proof that he had tried to protect me in the only way he knew how. I had spent years thinking home was something you inherited by staying put, by being the one who never left. But standing there with my feet planted on the soil my grandfather had protected and my father had honored, I finally understood what he meant. Home is not owned by the loudest person in the room. It is owned by the truth that survives them. A month later, Travis brought me a box from the garage. Inside was the last thing Denise had forgotten to take. My mother's silver music box, the one that still played a cracked version of You Are My Sunshine. The song was slightly off-key, like memory often is, but when I wound it and heard the little metal notes rise into the quiet kitchen, I had to press a hand to my mouth. She said I could keep it if I wanted, Travis told me, looking uncomfortable. Thought you should have it. I turned the box over in my hands and nodded. Thanks. He lingered in the doorway. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I believed him. Not because apology fixes everything, but because sometimes being seen matters more than being absolved. After he left, I set the music box beside my mother's photo on the mantel and stood there a while in the soft evening light. The house creaked around me, settling into its old bones. Outside, the land stretched dark and still beneath the stars. Denise had sold a house she thought was hers. What she never understood was that the walls were only part of the story. The true inheritance was underneath, in the ground itself, in the deeds and records and promises that outlasted her greed. She tried to take a home by force of assumption, but the earth beneath it had already been claimed by the one person she considered too small to matter, me. And in the end, that was the most powerful revenge of all. Not screaming, not revenge for its own sake. Just standing where I was legally, quietly, undeniably meant to stand, while the woman who tried to erase me was forced to watch the life she stole unravel in public, one document at a time. The house is still there now. The porch swing moves in the wind. The oak tree out front still leans toward the road. The hydrangeas bloom every summer like they never missed a season. Sometimes I sit on the back steps at dusk and think about my father, about my mother, about the complicated, wounded people who raised me and nearly broke me and somehow left behind the pieces I needed to put myself back together. I used to think justice had to feel like triumph. Now I know it can feel quieter than that. Sometimes justice is a recorded deed. Sometimes it is a court ruling. Sometimes it is a woman standing in her own yard, holding the proof of her place in the world, and realizing no one gets to sell it out from under her again.